And we're back. It is Friday. We are doing some debate debrief. You're here with Emily and Colin, and we're very excited to also be joined by Jefferson Smith. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning. How you doing?
Good morning.
You sound fully caffeinated.
Well, I'm just excited to be here and listen to your... I don't know how hot my takes are, Emily, but I'm excited to hear your college hot takes about the debate.
Oh, I'm so disappointed, Jefferson.
About what?
Last night was crazy. I thought it was an example of exactly what not to do with regard to a debate.
Make your case. I'm listening with rapt attention.
You're intrigued, right?
Yeah.
Well, as I was saying to Colin as we just got started this morning, all of these candidates agreed to a set of rules. They had a sense that they were going to have a particular time frame to give their responses. And they signed on to that, either literally or figuratively. And then within about the first question that all just was thrown out, folks decided what they had to say was more important than what their colleagues were saying. They decided that the rules that had been established were insignificant, and this was an urgent moment for them to establish themselves and their thinking about each of the issues. So as a result, you see a more diversity or more spread, I guess, with the amount of time each of the candidates got to speak, with Biden having 13 minutes, Yang only getting a little shy of 3. And it was more of a social media event, more GIFs and GIFs and those sort of moments, dramatic moments we could talk about, as opposed to, I think, getting to know the candidates and really talking about the issues. What are your thoughts?
If you're asking me, I am intrigued by that take. I mean, I sort of thought about the conversation we had yesterday as well, and put it in context. What I noticed was that for lots of media outlets in the first debate, Julian Castro was one that seemed to have done himself the most good in terms of getting more attention. This morning and last night, looking at coverage this morning and last night, it looks like Kamala Harris is the one who is receiving the most attention for did herself the most good. And what I noticed as one of the more obvious common threads, they were both candidates willing to take down another candidate. Julian Castro on Beto O'Rourke and Kamala Harris on Joe Biden. And I thought both of them they made really legitimate points. But I thought that was interesting. And one of the things I'm also analyzing, looking at, considering is the format, and how the format lends itself to the ability to get attention, how the ability to get attention lends itself to being willing to whack one of the other people on the dais. And I found that a little interesting also. Here, Colin's thoughts. We had the sort of simple questions of winners and losers, but I'm also more interested in what did we learn. But Colin, what do you think we learned last night?
I mean, I think I really agree with what you're saying, which is one of the things we learned is a path to the top, and a path to sort of seeing rising poll numbers is to tangle with the leader, right? So Kamala went into this with about 14% support, I think was the latest poll earlier this week. Biden was at, I think, 34%. And all this morning, all of the headlines are Kamala Biden, Kamala Biden, Kamala Biden, right? And so she's putting herself on this sort of same tier with him, and I can't imagine that we don't see sort of poll bumps because of that. And I think the same thing happened last night, or Wednesday night rather, where you did see Castro and Warren being sort of the two big gainers of the evening. Warren definitely is the outlier among sort of these perceived gainers. I think she was less inclined to tangle. The meme explosion, which I was very charmed by on Twitter, was all of these comments about, Elizabeth Warren, facilitates a meeting and the meeting ends on time. Elizabeth Warren steps up to the bar and doesn't ask what whiskeys they have. She's already looked at the shelves, right? Like, just this very caricature of a person who is prepared, is thoughtful, is well within the rules. And she managed to do that and still come away with strength. That's all horse race. I think in terms of policy, I don't know how much we learned. I think the hand raising question about where folks were on private insurance was illuminating for me. I don't think I had known sort of that only two candidates the first night in particular supported elimination of private insurance. And so that was an interesting contrast where just Elizabeth Warren and Bill de Blasio were the only two willing to say, like, yes, I want to eliminate private insurance. And of course, they are the outliers in terms of polling even of Democrats, where most people with private insurance support having their private insurance. Mm-hmm. And so they were willing to stake out this bold space, which was interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jefferson, what did you learn last night?
Not enough. And that's one of my critiques of the format. My essential critique of the format is, and I know that the people who book these things have a different purpose, right? I mean, their purpose. And I try to remind myself of that as we think about what we should be doing here, that to some degree they're the big kids. They're the people who are supposed to know what they're doing. And if we could only be as professional and good as MSNBC. But then I realized they have a different purpose, and their purpose is not to save democracy. Their purpose is not to educate humanity. Their purpose is to get people watching, and that conflict is good for getting people watching. Conflict can also be good for elucidating truth, but it makes it harder for me. I mean, and maybe this is something that's only interesting to me, but it makes it hard for me to evaluate formats, or at least makes it harder to evaluate formats by just looking at other formats, because most of the big formats are driven by people with the same purpose as the people who put this one on. As we talked about a little bit yesterday, and forgive that I still think what I thought then is that a format that grappled with a set of problems, I think, could have taught America more about what's happening in the world and still help them see how candidates think through problems, how they respond to colleagues. There are a few things. One, I really appreciated Kristen Gillibrand's focus on campaign finance reform. Was heartened that Kamala Harris came out and her stance on healthcare, her willingness to differentiate herself. I think she was people who raised her hand, as Colin just said.
Harris then backed that up, though. She said she didn't understand the question.
Thank you very much. But a couple of takes I thought that were reinforced. I have felt for a while that Joe Biden, Beto O'Rourke, and Bernie Sanders were all committing the same mistake, and that mistake was thinking that their popularity in one role would translate to support in a different role. And Bernie Sanders' role as the very progressive alternative to, for so many people, to Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden as he's President Barack Obama, and Beto O'Rourke as candidate against Ted Cruz. Those are different roles than wearing the mantle of the person who may be president. And I thought that has borne out a little bit over the last two nights. Here's what occurred to me, and sort of what do we learn? Yeah, something that I'm wrestling with is, with the advent of social media, I think we are much more aware in the country about sexism and racism. It has empowered so many people to have more voices. I think we're much more attuned to that, not only because social media, but on social media, so much more attuned to it. Something I think we are not more attuned to is ageism. And I'm also seeing that creep into myself. As I said yesterday, that I'm also trying to watch my own reactions and see what biases are impacting my own thinking. And I offered that about Amy Klobuchar yesterday. And I'm watching that myself this time, watching Joe Biden and thinking to myself, oh, geez, this guy seems older. And then realizing, Alexandria Cortez can become really famous and is really telegenic. This country has lionized young women in our history. how many times have we been willing to lionize and make heroes out of women who aren't as young? And we saw the misogyny, I also think, was ageism that afflicted Hillary Clinton, and so that's a little bit of a reflection that I had this morning related to the debate. But why don't I shut up and let you guys talk?
I think one of the ageism pieces last night that I noticed is there were points in time that it seemed like Sanders and Biden couldn't hear. And so they would lean over and sort of say what or hey or a sort of thing, and this camera was right on them. And so any stereotype that you have about Sanders and Biden being too old for this race, and last night I heard the term sort of a nostalgia candidate. It felt like that was reinforced, that they weren't set up to be able to hear and be able to participate in the same way, which I thought was a shame. It was that stereotype was reinforced.
And I think several of the other candidates, were pretty intentional about calling attention, in particular, to Biden's age.
Yeah.
And I think I've been processing, I think similar to you, Jefferson, how much of that is ageism and how much of that is a fair critique of someone who is out of touch or still sort of living in the politics of 2008 in some ways. And I wonder about that. And I'm wondering if we have the clip where one of the candidates asked Joe Biden, if he's ready to pass on the torch.
Yeah.
Because I thought that was a really distinct moment. And so let's play that.
I was 6 years old when a presidential candidate came to the California Democratic Convention and said, it's time to pass the torch to a new generation of Americans. That candidate was then Senator Joe Biden. Joe Biden was right when he said it was time to pass the torch to a new generation of Americans 32 years ago. He's still right today. If we're going to solve the issues of automation, pass the torch. If we're going to solve the issues of climate chaos, pass the torch. If we're going to solve the issue of student loan debt, pass the torch. If we're going to end gun violence for families who are fearful of sending their kids to school, pass the torch.
Vice President, would you like to sing a torch song?
I would. I'm still holding on to that torch.
And
Bad response.
Yeah, that response was what for me.
I was like, cold dead hands. I got the torch.
And it is so what, right? Because that was 1988, the year before I was born. And so I think about, Joe Biden has been running for president for longer than I have been alive, and there is something about that makes me go, dude, you gotta let it go at some point, which feels really different than Elizabeth Warren, who's only a little bit younger than him, but feels just infinitely more in touch with the current moment and not someone who has been fighting for this job for 30 years.
He was set up. Not only was he set up in that particular exchange, but there was a question to him that was very direct of people say you're out of touch with this, what's going on in the Senate right now. Are you out of touch? And he was like, well, no. But yeah, they were really going after him.
But he also didn't take the moment either, right? I think about
he was so
it Reagan?
ill-prepared.
I think it was Reagan who was asked, I think there was a question about, do you want to speak about age? And he said, no, I'm not going to highlight my opponent's total inexperience. And seized the moment, pivoted, and made his age an asset, and focused on experience. And Biden felt really not good at that, where I guess I haven't seen. Bernie has some stylistic things that are challenging for me, but I'm not seeing
the screaming. Maybe
screaming,
is that
the
part
pointing.
of it?
He does feel like someone who's ready to tell me to get off his lawn. It's hard, but I don't think he's fumbling on the relevance in the same way that Biden is.
Jefferson, do you think that Biden can recover from this? Will he start listening and be better prepared the next time we see him?
I want to answer that two ways, because I sort of heard two questions. We recover this. I am one of those who does not think Joe Biden. I am not as convinced as many, I'll put it that way, that Joe Biden will be the nominee. I disagree. My wife disagrees with me. She's been pretty convinced that Biden would be the nominee, and also, well, she's a strong Hillary supporter, and there are lots of people in America who find great comfort in the fact that this is a person we know. This is a name that is known, and somebody that is somebody who can just be a known, safe alternative to the president. But I have been an old political consultant friend of mine who worked on the Obama campaign said, used to call it the carton of milk problem. And I didn't understand what he meant. And he said, oh, well, you try to pull a fresher carton of milk out of the fridge, and eventually you don't always want the old thing, you want the new thing. I think that's a little bit related to my comment on Bernie and Beto, and certainly with Joe Biden. I'm less convinced he's going to be the nominee. So can he recover? I think this is the kind of thing that happens when people are looking kind of at the fresher quart of milk problem. Will he get more distance? He was asked once, and I followed Joe Biden's career for a long time. When he was in the U.S. Senate, he was one of the few people. Now the two candidates that are running who teach me the most when they talk are Elizabeth Warren and Buttigieg. I can pull lots of things from lots of the candidates running, but those are the two that consistently dazzle me with their ability to cogently kind of combine a bunch of thoughts into the 1 minute that they've got, and if given an opportunity to go longer, well. Those are the two that I'm not saying that necessarily the two best presidents would be the two best presidents, but they teach me the most when they speak. Biden, when I was a kid, when I was in college, I was really impressed with his communication ability. I've liked the guy for a long, long time. He acknowledged himself that his big problem is discipline, because that's what's his greatest weakness, is discipline. Coming from various folks, the guy just didn't work hard enough. He just kind of mailed it in too much. That relates to Colin's comments of him not catching up, not doing his homework, not Googling enough stuff to be prepared for the current moment. I totally agree with what Colin said about how different he seems from Elizabeth Warren. But I think that discipline problem might map on to his willingness to prepare. Bottom line, I think he's better in the next one. But I don't know that Joe Biden is getting better as a candidate generally.
And it seems, his campaign also seems, both he is less disciplined, it appears, but his campaign also seems less disciplined than Warren or Kamala or some of the other frontrunners.
Absolutely.
Right? So last night you were seeing conflicting comments from senior campaign staff about his position and what he did and his history, right? Like they seemed a mess. There were leaks about field staff panicking at watch parties around the country, and then you had spokespeople saying, oh no, that wasn't real, and then a different spokesperson saying, oh, it was a little bit of a concern. And so it feels such a contrast too from Obama's 2008 campaign, right, where it was no drama Obama, right? Like it was, this campaign is on lock. We don't leak. We don't talk to press out of turn. We don't disagree with each other publicly. And Biden feels the opposite of that right now. And I just wonder how he started with this really strong front position, and it feels really easy to see how it's going to deteriorate, how he's going to lose ground from 35%. But with that apparent lack of discipline, it's hard to imagine how he's going to gain ground from that 35%. And 35% is not a nomination.
And it's not going to be enough to just pull Barack out to go campaign with him. Not that he's going to, but I heard one commentator last night say, Biden has such a long history, and he needs to keep the window to those 8 years with Obama and not go beyond that.
Nothing before 2008.
He needs to stick with the Obama administration for sort of his examples of why he's going to be the next best president. Yeah, the campaign situation is very concerning. I had the same feeling about the Clinton campaign in 2008. I expect a Clinton campaign to be run flawlessly. Mm-hmm. They have the resources. They know how to do it. I feel the same about Biden. Last night's transgressions with the campaign staff and this saying that Kamala Harris is doing exactly what Trump wants her to be doing. Like, who thought that was a good idea? They should be fired.
Yeah.
Immediately. That is not the campaign they need to be running.
Yeah, I I can't disagree with that. I'm wondering, like, so we have another set of debates, almost exactly a month from today, and with sort of a slightly higher participation threshold. So hopefully, if there's
I don't know
any,
Marianne Williamson's going to make it.
which makes me sad because she is incredibly entertaining, but is probably the best thing for the country. But what are you curious about? What do you want to know or learn between now and July?
That's a
like,
good
question. What questions did you walk away with?
Oh, that's a good question. Jefferson, do you have an immediate answer?
Yeah, I do, a few things. One, will Bernie Sanders, and I think the answer is no, but will Bernie Sanders move from movement proponent, someone who's in favor, not someone who's to build political movements. He was an excellent advocate and sort of progressive teacher, but hadn't gone and built organization to do stuff to accomplish aside from his campaigns. Weirdly, question.
Oop, Jefferson, you're breaking up a little bit.
There's been two chances to say how would you implement your plans, and what he called for was a great movement. He didn't call for how he'd actually stand up a federal program. And one of my questions is, because I'm trying to evaluate this, who will be the best president, and of the candidates who are the top 5 candidates, top 6 candidates, who will be the best president? One of those is who will sign the bills that Congress will send them. I think, genuinely, if I try to ask that question, not only to use Colin's term, not only through a horse race lens, but actually answer the questions that I'm trying to remind myself about, I actually think there's relatively little difference among the candidates. I think there's a lot of difference among the candidates of what they would prioritize. But I don't think there's a lot of difference among the candidates what they would sign versus what they would veto as president. And therefore, the questions about where do you stand on this or that issue, I'm interested in them because they're a lens that how they think through problems, and if they're willing, how they're willing to be, how willing are they to try to bend the arc of history for justice, how willing are they to challenge fundamental economic inequality, how willing are they to try to work tremendously hard to recapture democracy. That stuff matters. But I think, is Kristen Gillibrand really going to veto a bill that is going to come across her desk in a different way that Joe Biden would? Would Joe Biden sign a bill that Kamala Harris wouldn't sign? I mean, there might be those instances. I think they're relatively rare. What I want to look at, therefore, is a couple of questions. One, try to better understand their priorities. I really appreciate the candidates who say their early priority, their first priority, the priority but for which we can't do anything else, is to reform democracy. I'm interested in seeing who else might catch on to that notion. So far, I heard it from Gillibrand, I heard it from Buttigieg, I heard it from Elizabeth Warren, and so I'm interested in that. And then the other that there's been so little attention to, but of course it's so early, right? We don't have the first primary until February, is which candidates will demonstrate an ability to, in fact, use the levers, use the tools of executive power to make people's lives better. That means who can build or transform or improve a federal agency. That means who can apply most smart executive orders. I thought Kamala Harris, one of the more important moments was when she would say, well, I would sign it if Congress doesn't do it in 100 days, I'll do it myself through an executive order. That was an important moment, not only about that issue, but in demonstrating the power that a president will have and how they will use that power in the context where Mitch McConnell might well still be president of the Senate. So the stuff I still want to hear is things that will end who's going to be a better president, and not only who's a yes or no on a given issue, who will raise their hand on a given issue, because so much of that will be out of the hands of the president. It's not in their hands until a member of Congress, until a majority of Congress or a majority of 2 chambers puts it in their hands.
Yep.
I think you're smarter than me, so you're focusing on the issues and the substance. What I'm really curious about is side of the horse race piece, and in particular, somehow over the last hour we have managed to not talk about sort of the most heated exchange of the evening, which was a back and forth between Senator Harris and Senator Biden on race. And so I'm wondering if we can start with that clip, because I think it really feeds into what I'm thinking about.
I do not believe you are a racist. And I agree with you when you commit yourself to the importance of finding common ground. But I also believe, and it's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me. So I will tell you that on this subject, it cannot be an intellectual debate among Democrats. We have to take it seriously. We have to act swiftly. As Attorney General of California, I was very proud to put in place a requirement that all my special agents would wear body cameras and keep those cameras on.
Gives me chills.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, it definitely touches on the age piece that we were talking about earlier, right? Kamala Harris was 6 years old while Senator Biden was a child, while Senator Biden was involved in the busing debate. But I think more substantially, it touches on Biden's very complicated history with communities of color and with Black communities in specific. And Kamala hit him hard on it, and he tried to push back. He claimed that it was a mischaracterization of his position, and you know, she asked him whether or not he thought it was wrong to oppose busing in America, and he had an answer to that too. And so we'll play that clip as well.
Do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America then?
No.
Do you agree?
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I opposed.
Well,
I
there
did
was
not
a failure of states to integrate public schools in America. I was part of the second class to integrate Berkeley, California public schools almost 2 decades after Brown v. Board of Education.
Because your city council made that decision. It was a local decision.
So that's where the federal government must step in. That's why we have the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. That's why we need to pass the Equality Act. That's why we need to pass the ERA, because there are moments in history where states fail to preserve the civil rights of all people.
I have supported the ERA from the very beginning.
And that was really just on point, and I think gets to a philosophical difference, right? Biden ended up sounding like a Republican, right? Where it was all about state and local control. Fundamentally, I think the best summary of what he said, or a particular summary that I think is gaining traction, was, you know, Biden supports racial integration unless white people don't want it, right? Which is sort of what he was saying. Yes, I support this, but not if Berkeley isn't on board. And it was it was intense, and Biden comes into this as certainly the white candidate with the most support in Black communities, which is huge, right? You cannot win the Democratic nomination without the support of Black voters, and a Democrat cannot win the general election, without the support of Black voters. And so there's this really key moment here. And so what I'm really watching is how these debates and the sort of intensity that follows will change that support, and I think you know, we have a piece. I think Mayor Pete leaned into this, and I think we have to do some.
You're listening to XRAY FM at KXRY Portland and KQAC HD3 Portland at 107.1 and 91.1 FM, streaming online everywhere at xray.fm. I think, Colin, your point about race is really important, about how are you mobilizing communities of color. This is a huge concern and problem more than concern, problem for Pete Buttigieg. And last night he was specifically called out about a recent shooting and a death in South Bend, and we have that clip.
The police force in South Bend is now 6% black in a city that is 26% black. Why has that not improved over your 2 terms as mayor?
Because I couldn't get it done. My community is in anguish right now because of an officer-involved shooting, a black man, Eric Logan, killed by a white officer. And I'm not allowed to take sides until the investigation comes back. The officer said he was attacked with a knife, but he didn't have his body camera on. It's a mess, and we're hurting. And I could walk you through all of the things that we have done as a community, all of the steps that we took from bias training to de-escalation, but it didn't save the life of Eric Logan. And when I look into his mother's eyes, I have to face the fact that nothing that I say will bring him back. This is an issue that is facing our community and so many communities around the country. And until we move policing out from the shadow of systemic racism, whatever this particular incident teaches us, we will be left with the bigger problem of the fact that there's a wall of mistrust put up one racist act at a time, not just from what's happened in the past, but from what's happening around the country in the present. It threatens the well-being of every community.
So what you going to do about that, Pete? That's my question. And that's one of the things I need to see. I need to know how he is going to win, convince, compel, inspire, motivate communities of color, because he's not doing it.
And there was a lot of commentary yesterday about a lot of people saying, "Oh, this was so great! Like a politician who's honest and sort of admits his weaknesses." And there was a trend, at least in the comments I was seeing, that they were all coming from white people. So I'm curious to see if, again, how this debate impacts his support among black voters and among voters of color, because it's super low right now, right?
Yep,
he's
like
close to
1%.
zero. Yeah.
South Carolina, I think South Carolina poll, he was actually zero.
Yeah. And so Jefferson, you're, as you're hearing these clips and these pieces, what are your reactions? What are you thinking about?
Well, partly, and one of the reasons I appreciate not talking first, I mean, I recognize that a lot of this stuff, some of the analysis I'm trying to do with the debate is consider my own reactions, because certain things will speak to me that don't speak to other people, right? And certain things will speak to other people that so I was.
Oh no! Come back, Jefferson. Come back. Get him close to a...
Again? I don't know why.
There.
I don't know why.
I don't know why.
Their answer to Biden's answer, and a key problem I see with Joe Biden for both of them. I mean, how does a white person, and by the way, the answer to this might be, well, they don't as much.
Mm-hmm.
Does a white person lead a coalition that has to, in its fundamental way, serve and also be led by people of color? And I think that's one of the most challenging dynamics for our most challenging questions for our country and for any candidate for president, at least any white candidate for president. And of course, one of the answers might be, well, we're not going to have as many white Democratic nominees going forward, and that's some of the best hope for greater racial equality in our country. But I also compare this to, if I'm not cutting out too bad, with Joe Biden's comment. At the very least, what I appreciated from Buttigieg is acknowledging responsibility and acknowledging the broader context. When he said, "Well, I didn't fix it. I didn't do enough. I didn't stop it," when he said, and he put it in the context of systemic racism, I've been surprised that Biden hasn't even done that. When he hasn't come up with an answer in his answer to the busing question that is something like, above all, something like Barack Obama was able to say when it came to LGBT rights. Like, look, we're all trying to bend the arc of history towards justice. All of us are too often, or too many of us are too often, not only reflective, but also inflictive on cultural biases so many of us benefit from and make what's happening in the country worse make bad things, benefit from bad things, and make those bad things worse. And one of the things I'm trying to do myself is the same thing I think we need to do in the country, which is raise awareness about how we defeat oppression. Mm-hmm. And finding the right words to say it in the most authentic way with the best examples, one that accepts responsibility. I think if someone made mistakes in my own life, like if the only thing I try to get my brain processing to do is to convince everybody that I'm always grateful and that I'm also great, everybody should just look at the accomplishments in one of our lives and say, oh, therefore everything you do in the future will be great. That's false. If instead we can demonstrate our ability to try to improve as human beings and use that as a model or model from our country, which has itself so many sins, and try to improve upon those sins, I think that's a thing that I've been waiting to see from Biden. And I thought at least the contraposit between Biden and Buttigieg's answers was interesting there.
I think that's spot on, right? So you have one person who's in a leading position, and so when criticized, I think was inclined to defend the specifics of his record, right? That's where he went, was to talk about his civil rights background. And then you have someone who's in a up-and-comer position, Buttigieg, who, when functionally criticized by the moderators, instead, his tactic was to take it macro, right? To sort of pull away from his individual role and to talk about sort of a systemic problem. I'm not sure either of them were super accountable. Like Buttigieg more so, but never talked about why he had not succeeded or what he would do differently as president, which is what I think, to your point, Emily, right? What I want to hear is, okay, like the two parts of a successful apology are, yes, here's what I did wrong, and I understand that, and here's what I'm going to do differently tomorrow. And Pete had part one, but his part two was instead to zoom out really significantly, which certainly played better on TV. And I'm curious if it actually will play with voters and if folks were persuaded by that.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Another, I think, important moment for Pete last night was when during the immigration section when he talked about religion. And so we've got that clip here.
The Republican Party likes to cloak itself in the language of religion. Now, our party doesn't talk about that as much, largely for a very good reason, which was we are committed to the separation of church and state, and we stand for people of any religion and people of no religion. But we should call out hypocrisy when we see it. And for a party that associates itself with Christianity, to say that it is okay to suggest that God would smile on the division of families at the hands of federal agents, that God would condone putting children in cages, has lost all claim to ever use religious language again.
Woo! I had to stop that and replay it.
I was like, do we need to replay it for the audience in case someone missed that? It is one of the great frustrations of my life, that the left has so thoroughly ceded sort of moral and faith-based arguments to the right. That has not historically been true, and a lot of the most consequential progressive wins in the history of the United States have come through significant faith leadership, and so I will say as a Mayor Pete skeptic that this was a powerful moment for me, right, where I was like, oh, this is someone who is willing to try and reclaim that ground, and I thought that was pretty compelling.
Yeah. Jefferson, what are your recommendations for Mayor Pete coming out of last night?
I don't know. Be excited about being Secretary of Education. I don't think that Pete Buttigieg is going to be president. I am dazzled by him.
Yeah.
It is the candidates who have impressed me the most since I've been watching presidential politics, and their ability to come up with stuff. Again, we see this through our own lenses, and each of us maybe play the game of when a question is asked, we think about how we would answer that question. And in my lifetime, the candidates who have done the best, who beat me at that game, right? Who like answer like, wow, that's a really good answer. The most times have been Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Elizabeth Warren, and Buttigieg. And others, everybody's impressed, at different moments. Those ones who've so many times done it, I think, wow, that person is really capable. I think he's deeply capable. My advice to him is to be prepared to answer the questions I think people will have. At least the question I have was, how are you going to be president when what you've done is run a small town, run a mid-sized, and and what are you going to do to build a coalition, recognizing that white people ain't the whole ball game? Those are the biggest questions I have. I don't think Pete Buttigieg is going to be president. I am deeply grateful that he is a candidate, because that line, I think, was one of the two most important, or at least most powerful lines last night. The other one was Kamala Harris's. And amen, and just retweet everything Colin just said. Being able to hold a place of morality. I don't think you can have a progressive movement if it is not rooted in morality. Mm-hmm. And we can get our morality from various places, but one of the most powerful sources of morality for many human beings is, in fact, religion. A hugely powerful moment.
Emily, what's your advice for Joe Biden?
Leave the race.
Pass the torch, perhaps.
Pass the torch. That'd have been so. Oh man, Colin, you're so smart. That exactly. I mean, he's got to listen. That's my advice. That he is, I'm sure, surrounded by brilliant people. The folks who do Pod Save America, who worked on the Obama-Biden campaign in 8 and 12, had a really compelling recent episode where they dug into right after that Friday fundraiser debacle.
Yeah.
They're like, this is what Joe needs to do. Joe needs to listen. Joe So he is surrounded by brilliant people who can help him prepare and focus his career in a way that that will reach a broader base of people in this country. So my advice to him is to listen and actually do what he's hearing. Mm-hmm. How about you?
Oh.
I don't know. I don't want Biden to win, so I don't.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of advice for Joe Biden. I think I'm paying a lot of attention to Kamala Harris among this group of 10.
Yeah.
And for me, right, that it is. There are ways in which her getting the nomination is very intriguing to me, because I want her to absolutely destroy Donald Trump on a debate stage, right? Like, and I think that's how that plays out. I mean, Hillary Clinton pretty much annihilated him on the debate stage as well, and Kamala is an orator and debater, several steps above Hillary Clinton by all sort of past experience, and so that's really intriguing to me. And I think she would wield the presidential bully pulpit in a way that few people can pull off. But I think to get there, I want to see her really. She needs to reckon with her role as a prosecutor and as attorney general, right? Like, when I listen to the progressive side of the party talk about Kamala Harris, someone who on paper should just be so loved, right? Like she'd get a lot of support. She's charming. She's well funded. She's a multiracial woman, right, from California, right? Like, very connected to a lot of the left movement. But instead, what I see is she's a cop, and she's a prosecutor, and people are engaging with her that way, and that's not the whole party, right? Like, she can actually she may be able to win the nomination without the support of the left wing of the party, depending on how big one defines that left wing. But I guess just morally, I want her to see her grapple with that and confront it, and address, like, what's different, what did she do right, what did she do wrong. And I think that's kind of what we're saying about all the candidates. Like, you got to reckon with who you are and your history, if you want to sort of move us forward. Jefferson, final comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just answer I'll just offer my thoughts on those two. Advice on Biden, Kamala Harris. I thought Kamala Harris was as likely as anyone to be the nominee since she got in the race, for a bunch of reasons. And the question I have for her is the same one that I have for everybody. Well, who's going to be the best president? How are they going to be the best president? I think for her, she faces a similar challenge that Barack Obama faced, which is she's been a senator for 2 years, and how many times has she managed the levers of power in Washington, D.C., map that to Biden, map that to Elizabeth Warren, heck, map that to Bernie Sanders, who have not only had more years in the U.S. Senate. Elizabeth Warren has stood up a federal agency. Biden has been vice president.
You're dreaming now, Jeff.
So I'd be asking about that. And for Biden, just mostly retweet what was said. But I am surprised that I guess I'd say this. Each of the candidates should be working on themselves as human beings, not only as marketers of themselves. And I think some of the questions for Joe Biden are questions about how a human being can learn from other people, can maintain neuroplasticity, can build discipline in their own life, can work hard. It's some basic stuff. I don't know how fast you can ramp that up in the context of a campaign. It's kind of hard. But some of my questions for Biden, fundamental. I do hope in the future, first of all, really appreciate being able to participate in this discussion and learning from y'all. I do hope in the future that we'll continue to kind of watch some of the deeper themes from how is racial injustice playing in the race to how are the formats lending themselves to understanding who would be the best president to making clear choice about this stuff. I just appreciate being a part of this discussion.
Well, Jefferson, thank you for calling in. Colin, thank you for being here as well.
Always.
Up next, we're going to speak with journalist John Baroque about the forgotten Iraq War. But there was a particularly compelling statement last night by a candidate we actually haven't addressed at all, which is Andrew Yang. And it is a familiar statement. You might have seen it on the side of a bus or something in Portland, because this was a popular statement. And Jefferson, a statement that came from you, yes?
Well, who's to say it came from? It was
connected
my best
to you,
line
maybe?
from 2006 to 2010.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 2004, 2010. But it was my phone blew up after Andrew Yang's statement. And is it funny that it came from the guy who's polling, who kind of eked into the top 10? Yeah, that wasn't lost on me. Do I think it's more of a 2008 line than I think it's a 2019 line? Yeah, I might think that, but it was still a kick.
Here we go. This is what it's all about. And when we come back, we'll be joined by John Baroque.
And the right candidate to beat Donald Trump will be solving the problems that got Donald Trump elected and will have a vision of a trickle-up economy that is already drawing thousands of disaffected Trump voters, conservatives, independents, and libertarians, as well as Democrats and progressives. I am that candidate. I can build a much broader coalition to beat Donald Trump. It is not left. It is not right. It is forward. And that is where I'll take the country in 2020.